Good evening, everyone. Can everybody hear me? Just doing a sound check. You're good. You guys can hear me very well. Very good. Welcome, everyone. My name is Richie Armartino. I am a co-chair of the Concord Human Rights Council, along with Court Booth. We are your MCs this evening. But before I go any further, I'd like to ask for a moment of silence for the 3 high school students who tragically lost their lives a couple weeks ago, and the 1 student who is still healing from that. So if you could send them your love, your silent prayers to them and their families, please. Thank you. The Concord Carlisle Human Rights Council, along with the town of Concord, have been sponsoring this event for well over 30 years. I was looking at when the Human Rights Council was first formed back in 1978. And so it's been quite a while. I believe it's been almost every year that they've hosted this Remembrance, and I think it's quite a milestone. Bear with me for a second. I want to convey to you my thoughts that I've been thinking about with regards to learning about history, about learning about particularly difficult history. And I've been thinking of this metaphor, so work with me for a moment. And I've been thinking about my love of vantage points provided by observation decks and towers. I love climbing them. I love going to the top of them. There's one, Great Meadows, Quabbin Reservoir. Anybody been to the Washington Tower at the Mount Auburn Cemetery? You climb, you scale them. You get to the top and you have a beautiful view. The climb, however arduous, invariably offers change in perspective, revealing truths unseen from the ground. Tonight we embark on a similar ascent by engaging with history forged in the crucible of history. We are lifted to crucial new understanding. Regrettably, some in our contemporary world seem to fear the challenge of remembrance, preferring to avoid the discomfort the journey demands. It is with this in mind that the Concord Carlisle Human Rights Council and the town of Concord annually co-sponsor this evening, encouraging us to learn, to witness, and to grow. Again, we sponsor this with the town of Concord. The little change in the program, Mark Howell is not here at this moment to read the proclamation. Maybe he will arrive. But they are very gracious in affording us the space and the use of the media and so on. So I'm going to turn it over to Rosalie Jarrett from Congregational Karem Shalom, who will offer some words of welcome. And then I'll come back up. I will come back and introduce our keynote speaker. Yeah.
I'm just so grateful to Concord, to you, to all of you who found this important enough to hold every year for 30 years. And that's so caring. Closer to the... Okay.
That's fine. Yeah.
I was just thanking everyone and thanking the leaders in Concord who wanted to keep this going for 30 years. It's an honor to be here. I'm so grateful for all you've done and keep doing. So I had something, I think I'll talk a little bit. I was remembering that one year, some years back, at this table, I've worked with a group of people who were descendants, 3 generations on the Nazi side and on the side of the Shoah. And there were people sitting here. There was a man who had been drafted into the SS when he was 17, and he told us how he couldn't do it It was so hard for him. But he was afraid. They told these kids to line up, and they said, if you don't sign up, you're going to the punishment battalion, and you have to take off your clothes and stand here and get a blood something or other. And he said, I didn't really want to. And he said his brother ended up there too, and his brother was working with a general who tried to kill Hitler. And they caught the general, and they killed him. And this young man said, he wrote a letter to his mother saying goodbye because he was going to commit suicide rather than be tortured and killed. And we were hearing those stories we never heard before. And next to him was sitting a man who was in the U.S. Army, who had fought against the Nazis and had seen the horrors of it all. And the two of them bonded. And then someone who was in the audience here that night was also in the armed forces, and he bonded with these guys. Something amazing happened. And one of the women here said, her grandfather and father were very wealthy men during that time. And what did they do? Oh, they thought, well, Hitler's coming in, we can control him. We'll keep our wealth and control him, and look what happened. The country was destroyed. So we always have to be alert to things that can happen and be strong and be together and support each other. So I wanted to tell you that our organization, One by One, it's been 30 years, actually. You've inspired us. But 30 years of our work together for the 3 generations. And what we decided is we're going to meet next April. We're raising funds for that, to meet with each other and with the people we've known from Rwanda, from Guatemala, from Peru, Native Americans, people from all these places we had met over the years who have gone through terrible times. And invite also a group called the Parents' Council from Israel. They are parents from both the Palestinian and the Israeli side who lost their children. And they are together, working together for peace. So we want to meet them. And that's our hope. So hope for peace. I was thinking, peace is hard to contemplate in this world. We face so many challenges. But we're told in Judaism, and I'm sure in other religions as well, that each of us is born with a spark, a special spark in the soul of something we can bring, some light we can bring to this world. And we're encouraged to help the kids if they love something and they want to express themselves and do something good, do it. And we can do it too. And that's what we're here to do. So I'm going to leave it at that, and you asked me to sing something later, not now. Okay, I'll sing later, and I'm so glad that you're here today. Thank you so much. And thank you again for all you do.
Thank you, Rosalie. Janet Singer Applefield embodies the commitment to illuminating history's lessons. A survivor of the Holocaust, Janet has spent decades sharing her story, ensuring we stand against hatred and bigotry. Through her work with Facing History and Ourselves, she reaches thousands of students each year, helping them to recognize the dangers of prejudice and the power of compassion. Her new memoir, Becoming Janet, which will be available after her talk for sale and for her signature, chronicles her extraordinary survival and resilience as a hidden child during the Nazi-occupied Poland, offering invaluable insights into one of humanity's darkest chapters. Tonight we have the privilege of seeking to understand Janet's story. We are honored to welcome Janet Applefield as this year's keynote speaker.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you. so much. Thank you. To the Human Rights Commission for inviting me, and special thank you to Ronnie Olitsky, who made this event possible. So I'm really so pleased to be here. Actually, my stepmother lived here for a short time at the Belknap House years ago. So that's my connection to Concord. So I speak to thousands of people, students and adults, with the hope that it will promote greater awareness and understanding of the dangers of hatred, of prejudice, of any intolerance. And it's my hope that each and every one of us will stand up to any type of injustice. I speak about the Holocaust because it was one of the most heinous crimes in the history of mankind. As a result of World War II, between 50 million and 60 million people were killed. 6 million Jews were murdered because the Nazis had a particular hatred against Jewish people, and they were determined to destroy all Jews of Europe. 1.5 million Jewish children were murdered. Only 11% survived. And I was one of those very lucky children. So I was born in Krakow, Poland, and I lived with my mother, father, baby sister, Sarenka, in a little town 50 miles south of the city of Krakow. And I lived there with a large extended family. Grandparents, cousins, aunts, uncles. I have wonderful memories of those first few years of my life because I was the first grandchild in the family, so I was pampered and spoiled. I remember my Uncle Arthur had a motorcycle with a little sidecar. He used to put me in there, take me for rides, take me to the candy store. I remember preparing for holidays with my mother and my grandmother. By the way, my birth name was not Janet. My birth name was Gustava, and my nickname was Gija. And throughout my childhood, my name was changed 3 different times. Also, my appearance had a lot to do with my survival because I looked like a typical Aryan child. I had blonde hair and light complexion and certain features. Well, my wonderful and idyllic childhood came to an abrupt end September 1st, 1939. I was just 4 years old. My father told me he was awakened at 4 or 5 in the morning. He heard explosions. He turned on the radio and he heard the announcer say that Poland was attacked. So the first few days of the war were very chaotic and confusing. My father sent me and my mother and my sister to my other grandparents' home in another little town nearby. When we arrived there, everybody was packing up their belongings and running away, heading away from the fighting and heading toward Russia. My grandfather packed some of our things onto a horse and wagon, and we started this very difficult journey. I remember seeing an airplane that was shot down, it burned and crashed. Sometimes we had to jump off the wagon and hide in a ditch because there were planes overhead shooting at us. Sometimes roads and bridges would be out and we had to cross the river by foot. And after a very difficult trip, we arrived at our destination. So life in the meantime, my father and my uncles tried to join the first arrived, we had no idea where we were. Of course, communication in those days was difficult. Not many people had telephones, and obviously there were no cell phones. My father advertised in the newspaper looking for us, and in time he was able to find us. Life in Russia was very difficult because of work. And I remember my mother and I going to the forest to pick mushrooms. And I remember she made a very delicious stew from mushrooms. And sometimes when my father went out to look for work, he would come home with maybe a potato, a piece of bread, something for us to eat. 2 very should report at the town hall. So that day, my two uncles went. My dad didn't go because he didn't feel well. He had sciatica. When my uncles arrived at the town hall, there was a marching band playing. They were made to sing nationalistic songs, and then they were marched to a nearby ravine, told to undress, and they were shot. So that evening, we waited for my uncles to come home, but they didn't. The other very sad and tragic thing that happened to our family was that my baby sister, Sarenka, got very sick. She contracted diphtheria. So in those days, there was no vaccine, and because it was wartime, there was no medical treatment, and she died. She was just 18 months old. After we were in Russia, well over a year, there was an announcement made that all these Polish nationals that crossed the border, and there were about 200,000 Polish citizens that crossed the border, in order to be allowed to stay and work, had to take out Russian citizenship. Well, my family was divided. They really didn't know what to do. My parents were afraid to stay because they thought when the war would be over, they couldn't get their property back. So they made a decision that we would go back to Poland. My grandparents and one aunt and uncle stayed. My grandparents said they just couldn't go back. It was just too much for them. So the people who stayed back were put onto trains and sent off to Siberia, where they were sent for slave labor. When we arrived back in our town, at first my father was arrested because the Nazis said that he was a communist because he came from Russia. And I remember every day my mother cooking, and she and I would walk to the jail to bring my father his food. Every day there were roundups of people. Some were sent for slave labor, others were taken to the local cemetery. They were made to dig their own graves, and they were shot into the graves. All the Jews were forced to live in a ghetto. And the ghettos in the big cities had high cement walls with barbed wire and guarded exits and entrances. The ghetto in our town did not have any walls around it. It was open. I remember one day the Gestapo came to our apartment. They were looking for valuables, money, jewelry, furs, art, anything of value, and they just took whatever they wanted. All the Jewish people were forced to wear armbands to identify themselves as Jews. My father heard that the Gestapo was looking for him, so my parents made a decision that we would try to escape. So one night, we left the ghetto, we took off our armbands, and we went to the train station. Train stations were very dangerous because frequently that's where the plainclothes Gestapo would often be. But we were lucky that night. We managed to take a train, and we ended up in another town where my mother had relatives living, a town called Remembrance. When we arrived there, my parents saw that the conditions in that town were very similar to what was happening in our town, and it wasn't any safer for us to remain there. And so they made a decision that we should not stay there. So once again, my parents decided that we would try to escape. So one night, it was August 1942, very bright night, the moon was out, my father got a horse and wagon, and we started to drive out of town. But we didn't get far because suddenly, in the distance, we saw Polish police approaching on horseback. We jumped off the wagon and we started to run. And you might wonder, why would we be afraid of the Polish police? Well, the reason for that was that there was a segment of the Polish police called the Blue Police. That group of police cooperated and collaborated with the Nazis. So we were scared, we started to run, and we ended up in these fields where potato plants were growing. We tried to hide, but potato plants are not very tall. So very quickly, they found us, they beat us up with these very big clubs, and they made us return. And at that point, my parents realized that they had run out of all options. There was no place to escape, no place to run, no place to hide. And then they made this agonizing decision. They decided that in order to perhaps save my life, hopefully save my life, they would give me away. So one day they sat me down and explained that I was going to go with Maria. Maria was a nanny to one of my cousins. They begged her to take me, and Maria agreed. So that day, my parents said to me that I was going to go with Maria, that I should be good, I should listen, I should be strong and brave, and that we would be reunited soon. So I left with Maria. In the meantime, there was an order that was issued that stated that people from that town and all the surrounding towns had 3 days to report in an area outside of Krakow called Wieliczka. My parents made another decision. They decided that they would separate from each other. Their thinking was that if they separated, maybe, just maybe, one of them would survive. So they went to this appointed place, and when they arrived there were about 12,000 people congregated in this big, big field. So it was August, it was very, very hot. There was no food, no water, and no place for them to sleep. They had to sleep on the ground. And then there was a selection. A selection meant that there was a group of Nazi officers who made a decision who would live and who would die. Approximately 1,000 men were selected for slave labor, and my father was one of those men. Another approximately 1,000 old people and children were taken directly to a forest. They were made to dig their own graves, and they were shot into the graves. And the last group was put into 53 boxcars marked with the letter B, B for the death camp called Belzec. Approximately 150 people were put into each boxcar. It was so crowded that they couldn't sit or lie down. They had to stand for 5 days. When they arrived in Belzec, they were taken off the train. Some people had already died because each floor of each boxcar was sprinkled with a white disinfectant, and when it got wet with urine, it gave off toxic fumes. The remaining people were taken directly to be gassed. So this camp existed only 6 months, and in that period of time, 600,000 people were murdered. So tragically, my mother, my grandmother, my aunt, my little cousin, many of my family members were murdered in that death camp. So in the meantime, my father was sent to the Krakow ghetto. Every morning at 4 or 5 in the morning, he and other prisoners were taken to a local cable factory. My father worked on an assembly line making electrical cables. He said he had a photograph that he put in front of him on his machine. And he said the only reason he wanted to live was knowing that he gave me away and he had to find me when the war would be over. He also said that he and the other prisoners were starving because all that they were given to eat was a little piece of bread and black coffee in the morning, and at night very thin soup. He also mentioned that he had a German foreman who every once in a while would give my father a little extra piece of bread. My father was very, very grateful. In the meantime, I left with Maria. Maria had an apartment in Krakow, and I remember so well being in that apartment because there were times when she would go out in the evening, leave me alone, lock the door, and there was I, scared, crying, trying to unlock the door. Obviously I couldn't. There was no electricity in that apartment. I was in a pitch black apartment. One day there was a sharp knock on the door. Maria opened the door. There was an SS officer standing there. He said, I have orders to search your apartment to see if you're hiding any Jews. He barged in. He looked under all the furniture, turned some of the furniture over. He came up to me, held up my grave. He wanted to know who I was. She said that I was her niece. She was taking care of me because her sister was sick. He looked at me with his chilling blue eyes, and he turned around and he left. And to this day, I remember exactly what he looked like. He had blonde hair, blue eyes, light complexion. He was wearing shiny black leather boots that came up to his knees, and I could hear the clicking of his heels as he went down the steps. One day, Maria said to me, pack your suitcase, we're going. I did as I was told. I packed my suitcase. We took the trolley, and we got off the trolley right in front of the ghetto. And we walked toward the ghetto fence, and on the other side of the fence was my father. And we approached the fence. My father put his finger through the mesh of the fence, and I held his fingers, and he said to me, I love you, Gija. That's my nickname. And I said, I love you, Tatush, Daddy. And I said, where is Mamusha? Mommy, in Polish. He didn't answer, he just looked away. I just knew that I should ask any more questions. And suddenly there was a woman standing next to us. And my father said, this is your cousin, Lala. You're going to go with her. Be a good girl, listen to her, be strong, be brave, and we will be reunited soon. And suddenly, she took my suitcase and pulled me away from the fence. We walked away, and I kept looking at my father, and suddenly he disappeared. So this cousin, I had never met her before. She was young, just 19 years old. She was living on falsified Christian papers. She had Christian identity. Her name was Alina Barkowska. And she was able to obtain a birth certificate from a Catholic priest of a little Polish Catholic girl who died. And I took on her identity. And that was my new name. And my new nickname was Krisha. And I remember there would be times when she and I would take the trolley car in the city. She would always tell me to be quiet, not to speak, not to say a word, because Polish people were forbidden to sit in front of the trolley. The front was reserved for Germans. Polish people had to sit in the back. But she spoke German fluently. I didn't speak at all. And she was very brazen and confident, and so we would sit in the front. We lived in another little town called Myślenice. She was very mean to me. She used to beat me with a fireplace poker. And when I cried for my mother, she would say, your mother is dead. She's never coming back for you. One time she beat me so severely that all my fingernails turned black. Some of my fingers got infected and my nails fell off. There was a very nice Polish woman who lived next door. Her name was Janina. I remember when my fingers were so badly injured, Janina made bandages for my fingers. And sometimes my cousin would go out for the whole day, make me sit on the front stoop in my pajamas. She'd lock the door, so I'd be sitting there all day long waiting for her. And Janina was very nice. Sometimes she would give me something to eat, and sometimes she would let me play with her baby. One day, my cousin said that she was going to the city to meet her boyfriend. So she had this Polish boyfriend that used to come and visit with her. But that day she was going to Krakow to meet him. When we arrived in Krakow, she took me with her. When we arrived in Krakow, she took me into a church and she told me to sit and wait for her. she said, you sit here, don't move. I'm just going across the street to meet Victor, and I'll be back. So I sat and I waited and waited and waited, and she never came back for me. So finally, I walked out of the church. It was late afternoon. I saw that the whole street was cordoned off. I crossed the street. There were little groups of people standing and talking, and I overheard them say that the Gestapo had come and they arrested everybody in that cafe. So here I was, 7 years old, walking up and down the street, crying. I had no idea what to do. Suddenly, a woman came up to me and very quickly put me under her cape, and she asked, "What's wrong? Why are you crying?" I explained that my cousin was in the cafe, and now she was gone. I said, "Could you please take me to the bus? I was going to go back to my village." And she said, "Oh, no, you're too little." So she took me into the building, the same building where the cafe was, but upstairs, to the apartment of a woman by the name of Alicia Gohom. Alicia asked me, "Who are you? What happened? Where are you from?" So I had a story that I practiced to tell if I was ever captured. And I told her that I was the daughter of a Polish officer, and both of my parents were killed in a bombing raid, and I came from Warsaw. Alicia accepted my story and said I could stay. However, I couldn't stay in that apartment for 3 reasons. One reason was that there was an SS officer living in the apartment building. Another reason was that Alicia's mother, who also was living in the building, she was very active in the Polish resistance. And in her apartment, she ran a hospital, and she had shortwave radios and ammunition. And the third reason was that when the Gestapo made an arrest, they always returned for the second time. So that early evening, the oldest son, Staszek, took me, and we walked for several miles, and we came to a farm that was owned and operated by the Catholic Church. And Alicia's brother-in-law was the administrator of that farm. So I remained on the farm. I remember one day we had slaughtered a pig, and they were cutting up the carcass in the kitchen. The kitchen was a mess. Suddenly there was a knock on the door. A neighbor came to tell us that the Polish Blue Police was coming. It was not unusual for them to drop by. They would just come to pick up butter, cheese, eggs, whatever they needed. So very quickly, they cleaned up the kitchen, they hid everything in the attic, and we waited. And not very long from then, for that time, they came. And when they came, I was really scared because I was always afraid of uniforms. Any uniform scared me. Not sure what made me do this because I said, "Give them vodka." So they pulled the vodka out of the closet they were serving, and then I started to sing and dance. So they were laughing, I guess amused, and drinking, and finally they left. So back to my father's story. So while my father was still living in the ghetto, the Nazis were building the concentration camp called Paszów on the outskirts of the city of Krakow. And when that camp was completed, the Krakow ghetto was liquidated. So my father went to live in the concentration camp. And he told me of a situation that he found himself in. One night, in the middle of the night, he had to use the bathroom outside. He found a cigarette stub and he was smoking. A guard saw him and shot him in the face. And the bullet lodged under my father's cheekbone, right here, and just stopped right there. Of course, he couldn't get any medical treatment, so that bullet had to stay there. So when the Nazis realized that they were losing the war, they wanted to destroy any evidence. So in my father's camp, concentration camp, they were ordered to dig up the very shallow graves. There were thousands of bodies buried in shallow graves. So my father's job was to dig up the bodies, put them in a big mountain, and burn the bodies. He said he couldn't get the smell of the burning bones and flesh out of his nostrils for a very long time. And when that job was completed, the Nazis burned this camp to the ground. Today there's a monument and a museum there. And the remaining prisoners were sent to other concentration camps. My father ended up in 3 different camps. And I remember when the war was coming to an end, because they were fighting all around the farm. And finally it was decided that it was very dangerous for us to remain. So we left the farm and we moved to Krakow and stayed in Alicia's apartment with the other family members. And I remember there would be times in the middle of the night when there would be a siren that would alert us there was going to be a bombing. So very quickly we had to put on our coats and light a candle, and we all walked down the steps to the cellar. There was a very large cellar with dirt floor and wooden benches all around the room. We would just sit there and wait until another siren told us that it was safe to go back upstairs. So we were liberated by the Russians, and after a while we went back to stay at the farm. And one day there was a knock on the door, and my cousin's father appeared. He came to get me. I also had never met him before, and he came to get me. I really didn't want to go with him because I was scared of him, just as I was afraid of his daughter. But of course the family didn't feel they had the right to keep me. So, and they were very attached to me, and I was one of the children, and I loved them too. But I left with him. So I went to live with him and his wife. And he also had falsified Christian identity. His Christian name was Dr. Antoni Krzyzewski. And I just never liked him. I called him the rat because I thought he reminded me of a rat. But I went to live with him and his wife. So when the war ended, anti-Semitism did not stop. It was very severe in Poland after the war ended. So while I was still staying with him and his wife, I had my first communion. This was a subterfuge to show that we were a good Catholic family. One day he said to me, pack your suitcase, we're leaving. Again, I did as I was told to do, and he picked up my suitcase. We walked for several blocks, and we came to the Jewish Refugee Center. And we walked into this drab gray building up to the 2nd floor. There was a desk there with a woman behind the desk. He introduced me. He put down my suitcase, and he just turned around and he left. So now I would like to read to you a short excerpt from my book, and I have to read it because I'm so old. I'm almost 90, so I don't see as well. So, yeah. In 3 weeks I'll be 90. Thank you. So this is chapter 14. They called us the upstairs orphans. We were Sharota. I learned that was what the grown-ups called us, the upstairs orphans. We were the children who had no parents. We had had parents, but not anymore. We had been hiding in closets, forests, outhouses, and under floorboards. Some were starved and beaten, or had been passed from stranger to stranger with false identities like me. Each of us had a story, but we never spoke about what we saw or what we did, because the stories were too terrible. I learned that I wasn't the only one who'd been abandoned. 38 Wuga Street was the last stop for Sharota like me. But we were the lucky ones, because at least we weren't dead. So I went to live in the refugee center. I was 10 years old when the war ended. There were 70 children like myself, some little older, some younger. Every day there were lists posted on the wall with names of survivors. And along came a woman, her name was Lena Kuchler. She came every day looking at the list, trying to find her own family. And she came across this room full of children and made a decision that she was going to do something for the children. So in time, she was able to open 2 orphanages. And I remember the night we left for the orphanage. We had to leave in the middle of the night because there were men picketing in front of the refugee center carrying hateful slogans saying we all should have been murdered. So we climbed into the trucks. There were 2 trucks. One truck was for children who had tuberculosis and other infectious diseases because the Polish hospitals refused to take Jewish children. So they had to open the second orphanage for them. So we climbed into the trucks. They pulled tarpaulins over us so we wouldn't be seen. And I went to live in an orphanage in Zakopane, Poland. Only the high school age children were sent to public school. But every day they came back, they were beaten up by the Polish kids. Lena went to the school pleading with the principal and the teachers to please protect the children. But they didn't. Lena was always afraid that our home would be attacked because the other orphanage was attacked 3 different times. And finally it was decided that it was too dangerous to leave it open. So they closed that orphanage and those children came to live with us. And because Lena was afraid that our home would be attacked, she obtained ammunition. And the older children were trained in use of ammunition. One night, a Polish lady came to the door. She came to tell us that our home was going to be attacked. So the children took their positions on the balcony and on the terrace and they waited. And in the middle of the night, Polish men came. They were on horseback. They were carrying fire torches. The children were really brave and they were able to protect and defend our home. One day, Lena went back to the refugee center to pick up some provisions. And she overheard a man asking about his child. She said to him, "Can you describe what your daughter looks like?" He described a girl with long blonde braids, light complexion, green eyes, and a birthmark on her left thigh. Lena thought for a moment, and she said, "I think I have your daughter." So she came back to the orphanage, called me down to her office. I didn't know why she was calling me. I was a little nervous. I thought maybe I did something wrong. But I sat in this big chair, and she said, "Krisha," she said, "can you lift your skirt just a little bit?" And she was staring at my birthmark. And she said, "I have a wonderful surprise. Your father has survived." And I'll always remember the reunion with my father because when I first saw him, I was so scared of him. He looked like a skeleton. I hadn't seen him for 3.5 years. And he was kissing and hugging and telling me he's going to take me. I didn't want to go because for the first time I had friends. And Lena was our mother. We called her mother. My father was really sick. He couldn't take me right away. So he rented a room nearby. I saw him every day. And we got reacquainted. And in time, he was able to take me. And we went back to our town and moved in with 3 of my father's friends who survived. We moved into my grandparents' apartment, which was above their store. It was like a shell of an apartment because whoever had lived there before ripped out everything. There was nothing there, but we moved in there. But we weren't safe there either, because there were notes posted on our front door saying we would be murdered. 2 of my father's friends were murdered. 2 young men driving in a car. They were ambushed and shot. My father went to the police chief asking for protection, and the police chief said all he could do was to give my father a gun. So my father slept with a gun. And in time, he realized that it was too dangerous for us to remain in our town. So we moved to Krakow. And by that time, my grandfather and my aunt and uncle returned from Siberia. My grandmother did not return. She died there. One day, my father and I were walking in the park. We sat on a bench, and my father said, "I have something really important to discuss with you and ask you." He said, it's very dangerous for us to remain in Poland. We can't stay here. We have to leave. He said, you have two uncles. One uncle is living in Palestine, your Uncle Adik, and your Uncle Jack is living in America. He said, where do you want to go? And I said, I want to go to America. And he said, why? Why do you want to go there? And I said, because I heard that money grows on trees. So, of course, it was not a simple matter of packing and leaving. It took about 2 years for us to get the proper documents. We had distant relatives living in New Jersey. They were the ones who sponsored our coming to America. And basically these documents stated that if my father couldn't support himself and support me, that the family would take care of us so that we would never become a burden to this country and have to go on public assistance. So in March of 1947, we sailed on a marine transport boat. Very, very rough crossing because the Atlantic is stormy in March, so many people were seasick. All the men and boys slept on one deck and all the girls and women slept on a different deck, so I was separated from my father. I remember going into the cafeteria and loving putting a nickel into the vending machine and pulling out a Milky Way. And I loved them then and I love them now. The other food that I thought was magical was red Jell-O. I never saw anything like that. But so we settled in New Jersey. And so my uncle, this was end of March, but in April, my Uncle Jack took me to register me for school. Now, I was 11, almost 12 when I came, and I had never been to school. I knew how to read and write in Polish, but I didn't speak English. He took me into an elementary school, Franklin School in Rahway, New Jersey. And right there in the school office, he said to me, what name do you want? You have to have an American name. Again, I hadn't thought about it, but I came up with the name Jeanette because we had a cousin who was French. She lived in Paris. She used to visit in the summer. She was very beautiful and glamorous, and she had long red nails. So I said Jeanette, and my uncle turned to the school secretary and he said, her name is Janet. So that's how I became Janet. So I was put into a 5th, 6th grade in April, but by the end of the school year, I was promoted to the 7th grade, which was the right grade for me, because I just turned 12. But we had a real serious problem. We came on a medical visa for my father to get his bullet removed. That was good for 90 days. We had another visa to go to Venezuela in 90 days. The only way we could remain in this country is if my father married an American citizen. So the family looked around. They found him a wife. So there is my stepmother, Sadie, who lived in Concord in her older age. But anyway, so then I continued. I remember my 8th grade teacher always referring to me as that little foreign girl. I was trying to fit in, blend in, not to stand out too much. That's how she identified me. I had a wonderful group of girlfriends who sort of took me under their wing, socialized me, helped me out. I'm still good friends with them. They live in New Jersey. I speak to my friend Pat every single week. And so then I obviously continued. I was a good student in high school. I was active, and with exception of one subject, geometry. I could not get that subject at all. But then I went off to college. But at age 19, I got married. So this was the 1950s when young women, girls, married. I promised my parents I would finish college. I kept my promise. I carried a baby to class. And when I talk to kids, I say, don't do it. You're too young. But, I finished college, I graduated, I got my undergraduate degree, and later on when my children were older, I continued my education. I got my master's degree. So I know when I'm no longer here, I know that my legacy will continue because my children and grandchildren will continue to tell my story. And now that my book is out in the world, the story will live on. And I've often thought about the people that saved me. They didn't just save my life, they saved lives of future generations. And they were the true heroes. They did something so difficult and dangerous, and yet they followed their conscience, their heart. So I realize now the importance of the choices that we all make, because even the smallest acts of kindness or gratitude have a ripple effect. The Holocaust did not start with gas chambers. It started with words. It started very slowly, and like sowing seeds, and the hatred grew and grew and grew. So I realize the importance of each and every one of us not be silent and speak against any wrong that we might see. So I thank you so much for listening.
Can you hear me? Yeah, there we go. If we have some Q&A time right now. If people have any questions, Court and I will hand out the microphones to anybody who wants to ask a question. Just raise your hand. That was so awesome. Those stories are terrific, yeah. I always wonder, if I can start the questioning, I always wonder how your younger audiences respond, and what type of questions do they ask?
The students are amazing. I've never been in a school where the children were not, listening so intently and asking very provocative and good questions. Yes, so, yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm wondering when you began to feel you could tell your story publicly.
So, first of all, it was a very long time before survivors spoke. It was years later, because we just couldn't talk about what had happened. People here had a difficult time hearing what really happened. But also, for me, I kind of devalued or minimized my own story because I didn't consider myself a survivor. I thought the people who experienced concentration camps, they were the survivors. But over time, I realized that people did want to hear what I had to say. And I started, I would say, in the early 80s through an organization called Facing History and Ourselves. And gradually, and today I'm very, very busy speaking all over, not only in Massachusetts, but in other states also. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay.
I wonder if you could tell us a bit about your book. We're going to ask you to stick around after the presentation to sign books for anybody who cares, but tell us about the origins of the book, if you'd be so kind.
So my writing, my son, my older son, who tragically died 4 years ago, he was a writer, and he encouraged me to write. And he was the first one to go back to Poland. And and even my father, when I was just 12 years old, encouraged me to write everything down. And I remember fighting him. I didn't want to do it, but I did it and just wrote a few things that, what happened to me. And then I joined a writing group, a memoir writing group, and I was writing stories, just short stories, and eventually the book started to be pulled together. And I must give my whole family huge credit, because my 2 grandsons are involved, have been involved with the book. One of my grandsons, Isaac, designed the cover, and my other grandson did the mapping in the book, and both of them, one does the social media, the other does my website. So, and of course my daughter and my other son. My daughter is amazing. She's where are you, Dad? There she is. she's like everything to me. She retired in August, so now she is working full time for me. And so my daughter and my son, my other son, is also very much involved. So I'm very fortunate, because it's been a family affair.
We have a question over here.
Hi, thank you so much for a moving story. Have you been back to Poland yourself?
Yes, so I've been back to Poland 5 times. Each trip has been very different. At first, my first trip was early 80s, when my whole family went, my children, my husband, and I remember that first trip was probably the most difficult one, because I didn't want to have fun. I didn't want to go to a museum. I didn't want to, I was just like going to places that I remembered, and that was it. And of course, meeting my Polish family, that was very exciting, knocking on the door and appearing there after all these years. And they were wonderful. They were, very receptive to my family. So I've been there 5 times. And in 2012, I was contacted by a young Polish historian who is getting her doctorate in Holocaust studies. Her name is Karolina Pons, and she found me on the internet. As a result of that connection, she's done a tremendous amount of research on my family. That's how I know so many details, because my story really has evolved. I had no idea how my family died. I knew they were gone, but I didn't know how they died. But now I know exactly how every member of my family died. And I'm still in contact with my Polish family.
Another question over here.
Can you tell us about your reception in the U.S. and whether you experienced any significant anti-Semitism when you got to Jersey?
I was very fortunate. I did not experience any anti-Semitism or any bullying or, it was great. Later on in my adult life, I have experienced anti-Semitism, that's for sure.
Thank you for telling your story. I find it both tragic and miraculous at the same time. In viewing the screen, I'm moved by the photographs. How did you come to this series of photographs?
So my grandfather that escaped to Russia, I guess he just grabbed photographs when we first left. My uncle in Palestine, he had photos. And I think in those days people exchanged a lot of photographs. So I'm so fortunate to have these. And I have many, many more. Yes.
What advice do you have for us now in our current situation?
Ooh, that's a heavy one. We can't give up. We have to fight. We have to resist what's happening. We can't be silent. Each and every one of us has power to make a difference, and whatever means, we find, we should protest.
Oh, hi. So you did Facing History in Ourselves, which I went through in the Concord Middle Schools. And so when did you think you could transform to helping others instead of just surviving it all?
Well, I think learning history is one thing, but there's so many other lessons to be learned from my story, like resilience or hopefulness or the forces of good and evil. So just sometimes students are able to relate to some of the difficulties that they are going through in their own lives, and hopefully they gain some strength to deal with whatever they're dealing with.
Thank you again so much for telling us your story. Really fabulous. I'd like to introduce Mark Howell from the Select Board, who will read the proclamation, and then Rosalie after him to close us out.
Good evening and thank you. It's truly an honor to hear these stories this evening. This is a proclamation from the Concord Select Board from April 14th, and it's my honor to read it. In days of remembrance for the victims of the Holocaust. Whereas the Holocaust was the state-sponsored, systematic persecution and annihilation of European Jewry by Nazi Germany and its collaborators between 1933 and 1945, 6 million were murdered. Roma, Gypsies, people with disabilities, and Poles were also targeted for destruction and decimation for racial, ethnic, and national reasons. And millions more, including homosexuals, Jehovah's Witnesses, Soviet prisoners of war, and political dissidents also suffered grievous oppression and death under Nazi tyranny. And whereas the history of the Holocaust offers an opportunity to reflect on the moral responsibilities of individuals, societies, and governments, and whereas we, the people of Concord, should always remember the terrible events of the Holocaust and the genocides in Armenia, Cambodia, Bosnia, Rwanda, Darfur, we all have the duty to use these memories as a tolerance, tyranny, and discrimination. And whereas we, the people of Concord, should actively rededicate ourselves to the principles of individual freedom in a just society, and whereas April 24th, 2025 has been designated pursuant to an act of Congress and internationally as the Day of Remembrance for victims of the Nazi Holocaust, known as Yom HaShoah. And whereas it is appropriate for the people of Concord to join the international commemoration, and now therefore we, the Concord Select Board, call for this memorial service for the victims of the Holocaust to be held here in the Concord Townhouse on today, Sunday, May 4th, 2025, and proclaim the week of April 20th, 2025 through April 27th, 2025 as days of remembrance for the victims of the Holocaust. Signed, the Select Board of Concord.
I'm in tears. Janet, you know, you brought out my history, my stories. You touched me so deeply. 'Cause my mother lost most of her family. She was in the ghetto of Lodz and in Auschwitz. And my father ran away from, he tried to be a partisan. He was captured and he was in Dachau. And then they came here with no relatives or anything, and I grew up with that. And I sort of live without the tears, but thank you. And so glad you're here. And I'm so grateful to Concord for this honor. Now, how am I supposed to sing a song? I had a song I was going to sing. It was a sort of up-tempo thing, but the other, now I'm thinking, yeah, well, this other one is, I thought about, this is one I wrote many years ago, and I think it goes with you more. But if you want more music, I can do that too, but we'll see. We're here, our seeds are planted in the land. We're here, although they thought we'd die at their command. We're here, and no one ever will erase our stand. We're here to love again, to live, begin again to give. We're here. We came, dry branches fallen from the tree. We came, not knowing how this strange new world would be. We came with all the memories of the ones we left behind. We turned our lives away from death. We took another breath and sang our songs. Once more we would be heard. We carry tears for many lost lives. We bear the names of those whose cries went out like smoke, lost in the skies. Yet once more strong we join in song, and once again we will dance. The wedding music will enhance our lives. Our children will once more smile, and we will sing Am Yisrael Chai. Dai 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 dai.
Thank you. Thank you for showing up. Janet, thank you for showing up again and again and again. We want to thank the town of Concord, our select board, our peace officers, Minuteman Media Network, our elected officials in the room. Thank you all for hosting this event for us. We want to thank Sarah Napier and Ronnie Olitsky for putting this together for us. Thank you. We want to thank everyone here and everyone online who shows up again and again. We have not defeated hate. We have not defeated prejudice. We keep showing up. We show up for those who suffer. We show up for love. We show up for kindness. We show up to protest what is wrong and champion what is right. You are here, I am here, because we have no intention of giving up. We won't give up. And our hope is real, and our intention to overcome hate and prejudice is real. So thank you for showing up. Most notably tonight, we want to thank Janet for keeping the necessary stories alive. We must keep them alive. Janet, we understand that you may well lead the way, but you don't expect to do it alone, and we're not going to let you do it alone. We're going to walk with you. So on behalf of the Concord Carlisle Human Rights Council that has been steadfastly insistent on staying in this effort, as Rosalie said, we want to ask you to go in peace, ask you to go with a renewed commitment to defeating hate and prejudice, championing love, and caring for each other. Thank you. God bless you. We love you. As we said, we have asked Janet to stick around for a book signing and simply come and say hello. Make it personal, please.